Okay, so we're going to add the hanging tabs to this, but this is a generic one. This is just the advent panel, but of course this could be any small wall quilt. You could do exactly the same technique for adding your hanging tabs. Now there's no specific formula I use in terms of the size of the hanging tabs. I really just sort of look at it and look at what's proportionally right, but generally, as a general rule of thumb, anywhere between sort of 2.5 to 3 inches, I find makes a good sized hanging tab. Now these I've made 10 inches in length because I don't want too much of a drop, but between sort of 10 and 12 inches also makes sort of a nice size for a hanging tab. So let me show you how I've made these. Now we want to start with a piece of fabric that's going to be sort of twice the width of your finished width of your hanging tab, plus add 1/2 inch for your seam allowance. So I wanted about 2 3/4 inches for this. So I've cut a piece of fabric that is 6 inches across and 10 inches in length. So that's the piece of fabric. Now this fabric is lovely. It's actually from the same range that the advent panel's from. Also, I've cut myself a little bit of interfacing. Now you could get away without putting the interfacing in, but I just feel it just gives it a bit more strength, a bit more durability. And also for the advent panel, of course, you've got little gifts and stuff that can go into there, which is going to add a little bit more weight. But even if this wasn't an advent panel, if this was just a general mini quilt that I was putting on the wall, I would still put the interfacing in. So we're just going to iron that on the back, and I always cut my interfacing just a little bit smaller than my piece of fabric. And the instructions on this one says to put it on with a medium heat and hold it for 8 seconds. Now this is the Vlisoline F220 is what I'm using here, and that's just what I had at hand at home, so that's why I grabbed for that one. But any sort of medium weight interfacing will do. Now I would just say, I always like to sort of hit it on the top of the iron once I've put that on, is just test your interfacing. Some of them, and particularly some of the lightweight ones, they can be a bit sensitive to heat and can sort of crumple on you a little bit. So sort of test a little piece out first, and if you find that it can't sort of hold the heat very well, you can press it from the fabric side and just hold it there long enough to allow that adhesive to melt and go into the fabric. So once we've got it like that, I'm just moving this about, let me just move that right out of the way for a minute because we don't need it. I'm just going to fold it so those two long edges meet, and then we're going to just sew down that long edge with a 1/4 inch seam. And then once we've got it like that, I'm just going to turn it through with my trusty chopstick. Every sewing room should have a chopstick. Not for your takeaway. Well, it could be for your takeaway. So I tend to just finger press that seam, and then I'm just going to position that fabric so that that seam is lying nice and centrally along the edge. Now you could have it so that the seam goes up the back, but I sort of feel that that's still quite visible, so I like to sort of disguise it a bit more. And then once I sort of feel that I've got that where I want it to be, I'm going to hit that with the iron. Now once we've got it like this, I'm just going to top stitch down either edge. Now if I just bring in the 3 that I've made for this wall hanging, you can see I've actually top stitched it with my gold embroidery thread on top, but I've just used a plain green on the back. Now one thing just to note about the embroidery threads, they're not quite as strong, I don't feel, as our piecing cottons, our 50-weight piecing cottons. So I do tend to use it more as a decorative element. I wouldn't actually sew any seams with it, just to say that. Now I think I've got green in the machine, so I'll leave the green in there. And we're just going to run this through. Just taking my stitch length up to a 3.0. And there it is, all top stitched. Now you don't have to do the top stitch, but I like to do it. One, I think it finishes it and gives it a nice finished look, but also it just adds that little bit of strength as well. So once we've made those, now you could sew that as a whole sort of 30-inch piece and then cut it into 3. That works just as well. So let me set that one aside, and we're going to add it to our little wall hanging here, our calendar. Now I'm going to have it so that my gold threads are on the outside. And I'm just going to position it. I think I'm actually going to line it up with the edge of the pocket there. We don't want it too far in because you don't want your edges folding. So it needs to be in a position that it's going to hold the outside of your quilt quite well. So I think I'm just going to position it there. That should work. So I'm going to put a couple of pins in. And then the same with this one. I'm just going to put on this outside edge. And I'm just lining up the raw edges with the raw edges. And then this third one, I'm just going to put in the centre. Now, depending on how wide your quilt is, you might want to put 2. But I think actually for this side, I think this is about 24 inches wide. I think 3 should be fine. So I've got the centre point here. It's between those 2 pockets because there's 6 pockets across. So you can just find the centre point. And I'm just going to put that one there. And then I'm going to take this to the machine and I'm just going to do a little tacking stitch. It's much easier than leaving pins in your work. So probably about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And they're all ready now. That's our hanging tabs all ready, waiting to be finished.